For decades, we've been told of impending environmental disasters, often with precise timelines. From vanishing coastlines to a world without snow, these forecasts were presented as inevitable. Yet many of them never came to pass. If they are lying to us, or at best, sincerely wrong about their predictions, this speaks to the scientific accuracy of those making these predictions, which is something we must carefully consider when it comes to the climate change debate. Our journey begins by exploring a long history of climate predictions that, despite their alarming nature, did not unfold as foretold. This pattern raises important questions about the certainty with which some forecasts are presented and how the public perceives scientific information. Understanding these past predictions is crucial for fostering a more nuanced and informed discussion about our planet's future. The mid-20th century saw some of the earliest bold climate predictions, often reflecting the scientific understanding and societal concerns of their time. These initial forecasts set a precedent for the dramatic pronouncements that would follow in subsequent decades. They highlight how early scientific observations were sometimes extrapolated into dire, yet unfulfilled scenarios. In 1958, the New York Times reported that the Arctic Ocean could become navigable within the lifetime of then-living children. Scientists claimed the polar ice pack had already thinned by 40% over the previous 50 years, suggesting a continuous trend. However, despite the decades that followed, the Arctic ice thickness remains similar to what it was then, and the Northwest Passage remains largely impassable most of the year without an icebreaker. Stanford biologist Paul Ehrlich predicted in 1967 that overpopulation would trigger global famines by 1975. He even proposed extreme measures like lacing food and water supplies with sterilants to control the population. His dire warnings were widely publicized, creating real panic, but instead of mass starvation, global food production grew, and the Green Revolution took off. The 1970s brought a surprising shift in climate concerns, with several prominent voices predicting a new ice age. The Boston Globe published an article in 1970 predicting a new ice age by the 2000s, with scientists blaming air pollution for potentially blocking sunlight and cooling the Earth. The report suggested dramatic climate shifts were imminent and irreversible, yet over 50 years later, no ice age has arrived. A NASA scientist warned in the Washington Post in 1971 that we were only 50 to 60 years away from an ice age. He believed a cooling trend had already begun and would continue until the Earth froze over. Fast forward to today, and we're still hearing the opposite, that the Earth is warming uncontrollably, and the predicted ice age never happened. Two Brown University geologists warned President Nixon in 1972 that global cooling was accelerating, claiming glacial temperatures could return within 100 years. The letter made it seem like a mini ice apocalypse was just over the horizon. Yet, climate trends shifted toward warming instead, demonstrating the difficulty of long-term climate forecasting. The Guardian claimed in 1974 that satellite data showed a fast-approaching ice age, suggesting the cooling trend was global and undeniable. The satellite evidence was supposed to be irrefutable proof of a cold future. Today, that same kind of data is used to argue the exact opposite, highlighting how data interpretation can evolve with scientific understanding. In June 1974, Time magazine featured a story asking if another ice age was coming, pointing to growing Arctic ice, cold winters, and migrating animals like armadillos. They made the case that the Earth was shifting into a long, cold period. None of those signs resulted in a planetary freeze, underscoring the complexity of natural climate variability. A New York Times article from 1978 cited an international group of climate experts who said there was no end to global cooling. They believed the trend had been happening for 30 years and showed no signs of stopping. These warnings were presented as fact, not speculation, but they were completely reversed the following year, illustrating the rapid shifts in scientific consensus. As the 1970s drew to a close, the dominant climate narrative began to shift dramatically from global cooling to global warming. This period saw the emergence of new anxieties, particularly concerning melting ice and rising sea levels, which would become central to climate discussions for decades to come. These predictions often carried a sense of immediate catastrophe. In 1979, the New York Times claimed that ice at the North Pole could soon vanish, warning of catastrophic consequences for global climate systems. This was the beginning of a switch from Ice Age fears to melting pole scenarios. Yet decades later, the Arctic is still very much frozen, demonstrating the resilience of natural systems. In 1982, the UN's Environmental Program head predicted a total environmental catastrophe by the year 2000, comparing it to a nuclear holocaust to instill urgency. The claim was that only radical changes could avert disaster. However, by 2000, the planet was far from post-apocalyptic, showing that even high-level warnings can be overly dramatic. AFP reported in 1988 that the Maldives would be submerged within 30 years due to rising sea levels, meaning the island nation would disappear by 2018. Instead, the Maldives has expanded its infrastructure and continues to attract luxury tourism. Just recently, they signed a deal to build over 100 beachfront villas, directly contradicting the dire forecast. A UN official warned in 1989 that entire nations would be wiped off the map by 2000 unless global warming was reversed. The claim was shocking, but no country disappeared due to climate effects, and sea levels did not surge as expected. It became another bold but incorrect prediction, highlighting the dangers of overstating potential impacts. As the new millennium approached, climate predictions became more localized and specific, often focusing on regional impacts. These forecasts, while seemingly more tangible, also proved to be highly inaccurate, demonstrating the difficulty of predicting complex regional climate responses. They often captured public imagination, but failed to align with reality. A 2000 article in The Independent predicted that children in the UK would grow up never knowing snow, claiming snowfall would become a rare and exciting event. Yet, it still snows regularly across the UK, especially in the north, and British winters remain cold and snowy in many regions. This prediction underestimated the natural variability of weather. In 2001, a report predicted that the maple syrup industry in New England would vanish within 2 decades, as climate change was expected to make it too warm for sugar maples to survive. But in 2024, syrup production is still going strong, and New England forests continue to produce the iconic staple, showing the adaptability of ecosystems. A 2004 story based on a secret Pentagon report claimed climate change would freeze Britain into Siberian conditions by 2020, also predicting widespread war and flooded cities. None of this happened. Instead, Britain's climate has remained relatively stable. This extreme scenario illustrates how speculative reports can be misinterpreted and amplified. The late 2000s and early 2010s were marked by a particular focus on the Arctic, with numerous predictions of an imminent ice-free summer. These forecasts, often made by prominent scientists and figures, generated significant media attention and became a symbol of climate alarm. However, the reality of Arctic ice proved far more complex and resilient. Several reports between 2007 and 2008 predicted the Arctic Ocean would be ice-free in summer by 2013, with some scientists even thinking their timeline was too conservative. But the Arctic still experiences millions of square miles of sea ice every summer, and the ice-free summer remains elusive, challenging these confident projections. A scientist from the National Snow and Ice Data Center predicted in 2008 that the North Pole to become ice-free by the summer of 2008, citing thinner first-year ice as a sign of dramatic change. Yet, the ice did not vanish and has persisted through every summer since, proving to be another alarmist forecast that failed to land. In June 2008, National Geographic quoted scientists predicting that the North Pole might become ice-free for the first time in recorded history. The projection was bold and generated widespread media coverage, suggesting thin seasonal ice was no match for rising temperatures. But the North Pole remained covered in ice then, and every summer since. Also in 2008, the Associated Press reported a NASA scientist's claim that the Arctic would be completely ice-free in the summer within 5 to 10 years, placing the supposed meltdown between 2013 and 2018. This statement was part of a growing chorus declaring Arctic doom, yet a decade later, the ice is still there and has not melted away. In 2009, Al Gore and others echoed the idea that the Arctic Ocean would be virtually ice-free in summer as early as 2014. This statement became one of the most widely cited failed predictions, with the phrase ice-free Arctic becoming part of the climate change lexicon, despite the fact it never actually happened. Gore's timeline proved just as inaccurate as those before him. In late 2007, another prediction emerged that the Arctic Ocean could be ice-free by 2012, based on recent ice minima in 2005 and 2007, which were used to extrapolate an imminent collapse. However, 2012 came and went, and the Arctic remained largely ice-covered during summer. This particular failed forecast was one of the most cited in climate skepticism circles. The BBC published a forecast in 2007 that predicted a completely ice-free Arctic by 2013, with scientists even expressing concern that this estimate might be too conservative. Yet when 2013 arrived, satellite images still showed large areas of summer sea ice. The Arctic's ice may fluctuate, but total disappearance remains unfulfilled. Norwegian officials, cited by Chinese media in 2008, predicted that if temperatures that year matched those of 2007, the entire Arctic ice cap could vanish. The concern was based on a short-term warming trend. While temperatures did rise slightly, the ice cap remained in place. Once again, short-term projections failed to predict the actual outcome. More recently, predictions have continued to focus on specific regional impacts, particularly concerning snow cover and localized environmental changes. Despite these warnings, real-world observations often contradict the dire forecasts, highlighting the complexities of local climate dynamics and the limitations of broad generalizations. An Australian media outlet claimed in 2012 that snowfall would become a thing of the past by 2020, warning people to enjoy snow while it lasted. Yet even by 2023, Australia's ski resorts continued operating, with many areas seeing normal snow levels. The death of snow never arrived, demonstrating the resilience of natural weather patterns. In 2013, The Guardian published a claim from a scientist warning the Arctic would be ice-free within 2 years, triggering a methane catastrophe. The urgency was extreme, suggesting immediate and irreversible feedback loops. But neither an ice-free Arctic nor a methane apocalypse materialized, and the Arctic continues to cycle through typical seasonal melt and freeze. In 2017, the Sydney Morning Herald warned that climate change was sending Australia's ski industry into decline, implying that snowfall would become unreliable. However, in the years since, Australian ski regions have received enough snow to remain open and busy. The prediction didn't account for the natural variability of weather patterns. A 2018 Forbes article quoted a Harvard professor who declared that Arctic sea ice would vanish permanently after 2022, describing the chance of ice remaining as essentially zero. But by 2023, over 5 million square kilometers of sea ice still covered the Arctic. The prediction missed the mark by a wide margin, underscoring the difficulty of precise long-term forecasts. Greta Thunberg tweeted in 2018 that humanity would go extinct within 5 years unless fossil fuel use was immediately halted, quoting a top climate scientist. By 2023, not only was humanity still here, but global emissions continued and population growth persisted. The tweet was later deleted, highlighting the dangers of sharing unverified or extreme claims. Glacier National Park once displayed a sign warning that all glaciers would disappear by 2020 due to climate change. When 2020 came and the glaciers were still there, the park quietly removed the sign. The embarrassing error prompted public scrutiny and questions about the reliability of such bold declarations. Today, many of those glaciers remain largely intact. In December 2021, the Los Angeles Times ran a headline warning that a snowless California was imminent. Just weeks later, the state experienced the snowiest December in recorded history. The irony wasn't lost on residents, who'd been told the snowpack was disappearing for good, illustrating a case of sensational headlines overtaking real-world complexity. In 2022, Bloomberg reported that the decline in snowfall would disrupt the lives of 76 million Americans, claiming that climate trends would soon make snow a rare event. Yet months later, the Sierra Nevada mountains experienced their second snowiest winter ever. Forecasting snow's demise turned out to be premature, showing the unpredictability of regional weather. A particularly impactful category of predictions involves setting specific points of no return or deadlines for irreversible climate catastrophe. These forecasts aim to spur urgent action, but, when unfulfilled, risk undermining the credibility of climate warnings altogether. They created a sense of impending doom that did not materialize. Al Gore was paraphrased in a 2006 Associated Press article warning that if greenhouse gas emissions weren't drastically reduced, within 10 years, the Earth would reach a point of no return. That put the supposed deadline at 2016. But 2016 came and went without any irreversible cataclysm. Despite rising emissions, the global economy and climate remained intact. The head of the UN's climate panel stated in 2007 that if action wasn't taken by 2012, it would be too late to stop catastrophic change. The claim was described as a defining moment in the fight against climate change. But no collapse occurred in 2012, and the date came and went with minimal consequence, demonstrating the limitations of such definitive deadlines. If there's one thing that all of these failed predictions reveal, it's that the idea of humankind causing changes to the climate is based on science that is lofty at best. God gave us this planet to enjoy, and despite what many climate change propagandists would have us believe, He has given this planet abundant resources and a natural resilience that has enabled it to sustain itself since its beginning. While God has given us a clear mandate to be good stewards of the earth and to take care of it, He did not give us the ability to change its climate or course of history. That is an ability that only God Himself possesses. In fact, God tells us in the Bible that one day, He will destroy this planet and create a new heaven and a new earth, as referenced in 2 Peter 3:10 and Revelation 21:1. Instead of relying on doomsday prophecies, let's rely on God's unchanging word, which has proven itself to be faithful and even scientifically accurate throughout the ages. For more information on how scientifically accurate the Bible is, check out our video entitled, "Is the Bible Scientifically Accurate?" We may not be able to predict this planet's climate in the coming years, but we can trust in our Heavenly Father, who holds heaven and earth in His hands. We encourage you to approach all information, especially complex scientific topics, with a discerning eye. Question the sources, consider the context, and evaluate claims based on evidence, not just alarm. Share this video to spark a broader conversation about responsible communication in science and media. Subscribe for more analytical content that encourages informed discussion and critical engagement with the world around us. While cycles of climatic change have always occurred on the Earth, the idea that the activities of humankind have been involved in these changes has no significant scientific evidence. Let's base our scientific conclusions on science that we can prove instead of speculations that we can't.